Hello. Good evening, everyone. This is David Ratley, and he's from the Washburn Area Historical Society, and I am Ginny Peterson from the Washburn Heritage Association. And we are here to welcome you to this evening's event.
This is the second in our series of 4 events making up the 2023 winter Tony Woiak History Festival. This season's programs are supported by, okay?
I'm checking with Sandy. You're back there, Sandy?
Oh, okay, I got to get closer here. Yeah, this season programs are supported by a grant from the Apostle Islands Historic Preservation Conservancy, and we are thankful for that support. We are also thankful for our presenters for this lovely Harborview Event Center, and for you. Your attendance and enthusiasm demonstrates your affection for Washburn, and it honors her heritage and history. There's one more person we would like to thank tonight, and that is our video recording technician, Andrew Grimm, sitting over in the corner there. Andrew is a teacher at the Washburn High School and a Washburn Heritage Association board member. He records the Tony Woiak events and posts them on the WHA website for preservation. They are available to anyone to view free of charge. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, these programs are the library, the Washburn Library has them, and also our Washburn Area Historical Society Museum. In the more than 60 programs that you might choose to view, there are 4 on arts and culture, 4 on Lake Superior, 2 on fires, 4 on women of Washburn, and 3 on men. Yeah. We got to even that up. 5 on businesses, and 5 on Native American culture, and 7 on buildings. And these are just to name a few. There's a lot more. We got 12 years of doing these programs, so there's a lot of them out there.
Thanks, David. It was in 2019, actually, that Christy Liphart prepared a program on the Bayfield County Memorial Hospital and Northern Lights Services. And we've got that on the website, and it's filed under the buildings category. Christy gave a really wonderful, well-informed, well-researched presentation that night, and I would recommend that you view it sometime. The program tonight, though, is, although it's also about healthcare in Washburn, but this time the focus is more on the individual people that have been part of Washburn's caring teams. As any of us knows firsthand, it is the doctors and nurses and the rest of the staff in these buildings that we are so thankful for. They dispense more than medicine. They offer sympathy and skills, advice and assurance, a listening ear and love. Our presenter tonight has been one of those caring healthcare team members who have served our community over the years. Dr. Don Christensen will share some of the people stories that have been at the core of health services in Washburn. Dr. Christensen, the waiting room is filled. You ready?
Well, we hope our technology is working. I think when we came tonight, I couldn't get my computer to sync with the projector, but thank goodness Lynn Adams is here. She's wondrous, and she kind of, we somehow put it on a zip strip and zipped it over to her computer, and hopefully it works. So anyway, I'm glad you're all here. The way this talk is going to go, I'm going to start out with some of the old history, and this was long before actually Washburn had hospitals and stuff like that. Kind of the first couple doctors in the area, and they were based primarily in Ashland, even though they definitely came to Washburn and saw patients in Washburn. That's part of the deal. And then we're going to move on into the more present healthcare system, and a lot of people will be sharing stories, and if you have a story you'd like to share, feel welcome to that. Especially at the end, we're just going to open it up to people's stories and stuff like that. But we do have some stories along the way. And a couple of people I'd like to thank also is Susan McGrath down at the museum. She's great. She helps you find everything. And my friend Mark Belknap in Ashland, I was talking with him once about doing this program, and he says, oh yeah, you know, I did something like that 20 years ago, and I got some nice stuff, you know, and so. Anyway, and then all the presenters that are helping tonight. The other thing is, this is primarily about, you know, our modern medical system, and realizing that there were Anishinaabe healers long before any of us Europeans ever set foot on this continent. So, but I don't know much about that. So, this is the guy, was kind of the first doctor in the area, Edwin Ellis. Now, he was born in 1824 in Maine. He actually went to Bowdoin College, so Bowdoin College was going at that time, and then got his medical degree in New York. And then he practiced medicine for several years in Maine. But then he moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, lived on a farm for a while, and then became involved with kind of a group of people that were surveying and claiming town sites in the Minnesota Territory and the state of Wisconsin. And so in the winter of 1855, he took the Lake Superior Trail up to Superior City and then snowshoed along the South Shore over to the mouth of the Sioux, and then walked over to, in the winter of course, walked over to Madeline Island, to La Point, and then went across to Ashland and started surveying down there and claiming land. There were already a few other people in Ashland, so he was pretty much in the Bay City side, that east side of Ashland, by Bay City Creeks. And then he brought his family up the next year or so, and things were going well until, let's see, it was 1857, and there was a big crash, and then the Civil War broke out, and pretty much everybody left Ashland, and so he did too. He went and taught school at Odana. There's a school there, and so he taught there for 4 years, and then he went up to Ontonagon and got a job being a doctor with the copper mines, and so he also had a small drugstore when he was up there in Ontonagon. But every winter he would snowshoe back to Ashland just to check out on, you know, his claims and stuff like that. And he returned to Ashland in 1873 and started practicing medicine. And his history in Ashland is really pretty amazing. He started all kinds of things and donated a lot of money, and is kind of considered the father of the Ashland educational system, the school system. I think when you claim half of Ashland, you probably have a lot of extra money to. So here he is in his buggy here. So the next phase is the hospital ticket system, and some of you have heard about this. In the lumberjack days, the old lumber barons, they didn't care about the lumberjacks. There was no health benefits or workman's comp or any of that stuff, and so then people would have to buy hospital tickets, and hospital tickets cost like $6 to $10 a year, and that if you got injured, then you could stay in a hospital for up to 6 months. And you think, well, how did that happen? And I think the biggest thing about that is hospitals in those days were far from what they are today. They're really pretty crude and no different than basically a boarding house with some hospital cots in, and the sanitation probably wasn't a whole lot better than the lumber camps, and the convalescent lumberjacks would take care of the more sick ones, and there was no such thing as nurses or anything like that. So anyway, the next actor in our game here is W.T. Reinhardt, or it was known as W.T. And initially he came to Ashland, or initially he was a school teacher, and then in Pennsylvania, and then went to medical school, and then came to Ashland. He worked at a couple other spots in the ticket business, and the lumberjack ticket business before he came to Ashland, but they had him come to Ashland. And in 1888, and he built the 75-bed hospital. Of course, it's not like MMC or anything like that. It's a boarding house. And that was in 1891. And actually, he did employ a nurse. At least one source says he employed a nurse. And that day, surgery was basically just, for trauma, with lumberjacks and the mills and stuff like that, it was pretty much trauma, and I think at that time, other surgery was kind of out of the question. We weren't kind of where we are today. Now, there's a funny story about Dr. Reinhardt. Yeah, here it is. So he was one of the first people in Ashland to get a car. And and part of I think doctors got cars because they did a lot of house calls. They didn't see people in clinics and stuff like that, even though they had clinics, but they did a lot of house calls. So he was one of the first ones to have cars. And his first car, there was just one, to get in the car, you just kind of came in the back seat, and you must have climbed up to in front. It's probably not the one that's in the picture here. And so then it got to be a habit for little boys to kind of sneak in, when he's driving along slowly and get a free ride. And that went on for a while. And then Dr. Reinhardt decided he was tired of that. And so he installed a battery with a wire in the back and with a little switch up and, a little button up in front that he could push, and so then he kind of got in the habit of just pushing this button all the time, because, those cars, it's noisy and it's all open and stuff like that, so he couldn't tell if there were a bunch of little boys in the back or not. And so he just periodically pushed the button, which was just fine, except one day he decided to give the nurses a ride and show them this new contraption. So he had a bunch of nurses and kind of showing him, but he was kind of forgetful, and so he pushed the button. The nurses walked home. Okay. And Dr. Reinhardt was kind of amazing. So in 1896, the German scientist Röntgen discovered the X-rays, and that very next year, Dr. Reinhardt ordered the necessary parts from Germany and put together an X-ray machine in Ashland. And so some of the earliest X-ray studies in the world were done right there in Ashland. And two of Dr. Reinhardt's nephews were I'm sure they got piles of pictures taken of their hands and feet and stuff like that, but they became, later on became X-ray specialists, or what we call radiologists, and one headed up the Department of University of Chicago and another at the University of Michigan. So right in Ashland. And this is the next character. And this is Dr. Dodd. And Dr. Dodd had a hospital, and he I think when people needed to be hospitalized from Washburn, a lot of times they went to Dr. Dodd's hospital. He's kind of an interesting character, and one of the things is he wrote a book, the autobiography of a surgeon in 1928. So he has lots of old stories about the doctors, some of his stories and some of the other doctors in the area. And then his daughter also wrote a book about him later on, and then he put together another book about just healthcare providers in the area. So we have a lot of Dr. Dodd stories. He grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and his grandmother and sister were just on the temperance wagon and just complete teetotalers, and that was temperance was their thing. And so then when Dr. Dodd moves to Ashland, the 1905 census in Ashland lists, let's get this number right, 83 saloons. Ashland was a different town, and I'm sure Washburn was exactly the same. I think when you had the lumber camps and those guys were out in the woods all winter long, some of them went back to their houses and their families, but a lot of them just came to town and spent their money. And Dr. Dodd is also pretty interesting. So, in his medical training, they were just starting to get this germ idea, and I think his second year of medical school, he spent a lot of the time cleaning out the operating rooms with carbolic acid and all these, and washing their hands with all kinds of poisonous stuff, but getting rid of germs, And so, and before that time, there used to be epidemics just ravaging these communities, like typhoid and diphtheria and stuff like that, because we had the flies and mosquitoes, and we had the outhouses and the dumps and the kitchens, and the flies just kind of moved around at the end of summer and kind of kept things going. And at the time, I think even with surgery, it was kind of they were just starting to starting to wash hands and things like that, but caps and gowns, they had aprons but no gowns, no masks, anything like that. And one of the things that Dr. Dodd, when he came, see where we are here. And this is his hospital. When he first came to Ashland, he'd just been here about a year, and then he and his wife got a bad case of typhoid, and they they were really down and out. But he'd hired a nurse for his new hospital, and she kind of nursed him back to health. And his statement with typhoid is that if he had typhoid, he'd much rather have a good nurse than a good doctor. And so in 1894, Dr. Dodd bought an old abandoned sporting house, and with an unsavory reputation. So you can figure that one out. He kind of had to, change I think they changed the reputation. And he ended up building a hospital, and he was a pretty good carpenter, so he fixed it up a lot of stairs, and the family lived in the back, and his hospital was probably the most up to date in northern Wisconsin, and best equipped and stuff like that. And I think for lumberjacks, when they came to the hospital, they had to kind of come in the back door, and they kind of completely took off their clothes and deloused them before they got to be admitted. His experience with infectious diseases was also helped the city of Ashland. So every summer they'd have these typhoid epidemics, and they'd start out in the lumber camps toward the end of fall or end of summer, like that, when the flies had free reign between the dumps and the outhouses and the kitchens and stuff like that. The lumberjacks would get sick, and they'd come to town, and they'd be in town, and then in the hospitals, and then all the discharge would flow off into the bay, which is like what we used to do in those days. But Ashland had, they were kind of on top of things, they thought anyway. So they had this pipe going about a mile out into the lake. But, you know, the thing is, it was just sitting on the bottom of the lake, so all these boats that were, you know, dragging their anchors and stuff like that, so the pipe was had lots of holes in it and so Dr. Dodd convinced the city to put in a new pipe and lay it 6 feet in the ground, and then they put in a treatment, you know, a filtration plant and chlorination plant, and of course all the typhoid epidemics stopped. Now, and like I said, Dr. Dodd wrote a book. So I'm going to read a couple of his stories because they are really fun. So they're kind of amazing too, some of them. I operated many times under the most unfavorable conditions with surprisingly good results. Some instances stand out vividly in memory, and many are forgotten, as almost every day has brought something out of the ordinary. On one occasion, I was called into the country and found a woman, white and almost pulseless, from internal hemorrhage due to ruptured tubal pregnancy. Operation must be done at once. So an improvised operating table was prepared in the dining room. I had anticipated the trouble and had taken a nurse with me who could give an anesthetic. It was dark by the time we were ready and had to operate by the light of a kerosene lamp, which went out before the operation was finished. I, however, found the tube, ligated it, stopped the hemorrhage, and finished the operation mostly by sense of touch. The patient made an uninterrupted recovery. Well, this next one is good too. So this one, I have had my share of experience with delirious patients, but the one I'm about to relate heads the list. When I was running my own private hospital, I had a young man come in with what proved to be typhoid fever. He had become rapidly and violently ill, but showed no signs of being beyond control. One morning about 4:30, I heard a commotion in the hall. I was sleeping directly under his room. Going quickly into the hall, I found the nurse trying to take the lighted lamp from the patient. Seeing me, he suddenly threw the lamp, which fortunately went out, though it broke into fragments. Then he dived through the glass panel of the front door, ran over to the railroad yards into a coach in which the cleaners were getting ready for the early morning train, grabbed a broom and struck out every lamp in the car. Then, grabbing a coupling iron, fought off his pursuers and ran downtown to a dry goods store, broke in the glass panel of the front door, went in and found a woman's skirt, which he put on. He then went over to the hotel where he asked for a room. The storm seemed to have spent itself, and he had quieted down when I found him. I had expected that he would be terribly cut up by going through 2 glass doors, but strangely enough, he had only a few cuts and scratches. He had apparently had hallucinations of being pursued and was making these heroic efforts to escape. Now this is the best part. He recovered and is now a prominent physician in St. Paul. In a recent conversation with him, he stated that the only reason I am living today is that a friend who had accompanied him to the hospital had taken a gun from the handbag he had with him. Amazing. One of the most interesting cases that occurred in my emergency surgical practice was that of Jodusky, who was tending an edger in one of the local sawmills. He was struck in the chest by flyback, when the wood flies back, and which in this instance was a 2-inch edging, 12 feet long, 2 inches square at one end, and tapering to a point at the other end. The pointed end struck him in the region of the left nipple, had passed through the chest until the point punctured the skin in the back. The edging then broke off again and struck his chest on the opposite side and passed through up to the back. When the force of the projectile had been spent, the edging had protruded and stuck out from the back a distance of 4 feet. I was called in, and on arriving, found that his fellow workman had sawed off the projecting end and had whittled it down so it could be withdrawn. I had him transferred to the hospital at once and proceeded to extract the small end, which was still in the chest. Fortunately, it was found that the second penetration had been between the muscles and the ribs, so it was not so serious as first thought, though the wound in the lung was serious enough, since fragments of clothing had been carried along the track of the edging and fragments of bark were left, which could not be removed. Strange to say, he had only slight shock, and though he coughed up fragments of wood for several months, he finally recovered, and fully recovered, and today is carrying on his business as a milkman. Apparently no words for his experience. I was called 20 miles into the, there's another one, then we'll go move on. I was called 20 miles into the country one February day with a temperature of 14 degrees below zero to see a sick boy. From the history, I suspected a case of appendicitis and found that it was. I had taken an assistant with me, and in the meager equipment of a farmer's kitchen, we made ready and removed the gangrenous appendix. The snow was deep, and it was in those days when we must travel with horses, following the road when we could, and taking to the fields to avoid drifts. We felt repaid for the hardship endured as the boy promptly recovered. Now the snowmobile makes these winter trips much faster and very much with more comfort. And like I said before, you know, the doctors were some of the early people in the area to have automobiles just because they had to do all these house calls and stuff like that. And this is Dr. Dodd. My first car was the 5th bought in our city and arrived early in July 1905. It was a two-cylinder, two-seater vehicle with a rating of 12 horsepower. I've had many varied experiences, some harrowing, but no serious accidents. Some were amusing, as once when the front wheel came off and rolled into the brush by the roadside, and again when my car jumped out of a rut in the frozen road and plunged down several feet into a swamp, breaking off the wheel. It happened to be in the reach of my farm, and I got a team to draw me home on the skid. One instance was near tragedy when a low-powered car, it stalled on the hill so steep that even the brakes would not hold. It was midnight and very dark. The doctor with me got out and blocked the wheels with a chunk of wood while I released the clutch. The brakes would not hold and the car started back down the hill. I turned it, thinking I was running into the bank, but instead ran off the other side of the road where there was fill made of logs several feet high running off to a very steep hill below. The rear wheels dropped over, letting the frame rest on the top log. Fortunately, the car stopped and did not fall backwards. We left the car and went to the farmers. We were given a bed until the next morning, and we went out with the farmers' team to let the car down the hill and hauled it back to the road. You know, some guardian angel was on the job, because if the car had gone off the cliff, it certainly would have rolled with the driver in it. And this is another story, then we'll move on. A rather amusing incident occurred when my car stopped on the road and refused to start again. On investigation, I found that the gasoline tank, which hung on the rear of the car, was missing. Just as I was starting to back to look for it, a repair truck from the lighting company came along with my tank. The men had picked it up some 3 miles back where it had dropped off. There was enough gasoline in the vacuum tank to take the car that 3 miles. Now this is just, and I don't know what you can see here of that, you know. It's just kind of a fee schedule, and this was Ashland County, but basically, you know, you have, you know, how much, if you lived in Washburn, well, I can't, it cost $10 to have the doctor come out. He lived in Bayfield, and then the various fees. And it's kind of interesting because they were going all over the place. And now, we have, one last slide. There were some hospitals in Washburn earlier, but none of them lasted very long, in just about a year. And so I think when you go back in the newspaper clippings, there'd be a thing for a hospital, but then it'd be gone. So in the early days, people had to go to Ashen to get their help. They had to be hospitalized. But and now this is a very important character in the healthcare system in our area, a doctor who came to Washburn just about the turn of the century, and we have a visitor from the past who is going to share his story.
Oh my, yesterday was quite a day. September 7, 1950. I died at the age of 87. Now, of course, I knew I was dying because I'm a doctor. Very few of you even knew me. So let me introduce myself. Dr. T.R. Spears, Tunis Robert Spears. I decided to return today to tell you a story. I actually have been ill and bedridden for about 3 months. And my granddaughter, Karen, would love to crawl up on my bed and listen to my stories, especially about Johnny, who rode the rails. That's a train. I wonder if Karen will tell stories when she grows up. My story covers many years, but it's pretty quick to tell. Here goes. I was born in 1863, in Greenbush, Wisconsin. That's on the eastern part of the state in Sheboygan County. I went to school in Plymouth, and I became a teacher. I think Karen still has my school bell from then. And then I went to Chicago, to Rush Medical, for 2 years, 1887, 1889. Now it's like 10 or 12 or 15 years, but I did it in 2. I came to Washburn, 1891. I married Bessie Robinson in 1907. And our house was on the southwest corner of Washington Avenue, right across from the Catholic Church, a big white house. Some of you currently live there. For 50 years, I was a surgeon for the Omaha Railway, and 20 years for the Northern Pacific Railway. That was great because I got a pass and I could travel all over the United States, and boy, did I love to travel. I went to Canada, I went to the West Coast. Actually, I spent a summer in Europe at one point. I was a health officer from 1935 on. What did that mean? I went to houses and put up signs that they were in quarantine. Smallpox, measles, diphtheria. Wow, would I have been busy over the last 3 years putting up those signs. I practiced in Washburn for 59 years. My office was located where Shawamigan Bookstore is today. I saw a lot, and I wish I had more stories about what it was like being a doctor at the beginning of the 1900s. I'm wearing my duster because, of course, I was in a buggy or in an open car, and I had to kind of keep clean. I did lots of home visits, and in fact, people came to my house. I have I think the granddaughter still has it, a porcelain top table, and people would sit on that table and be examined. But now, I'm tired. I have my medical bag with me, but I won't need it anymore. Not where I'm going to a new adventure. So I'll leave it here, and you can look at it at the end of the program. And I have some other pictures in the back, too. I saved some lives, and I lost some lives.
Boy, it's always hard following a ghost. Okay. And so, as Karen said, her grandpa was probably involved in this. The DuPont, in 1918, the influenza epidemic swept this country, and also 1917 and 1990. But in 1918, the Garfield School was used to house people with influenza. And let's see what's going on. Okay. How come it's not clicking forward? That's good. Oh. Oh, there we go. Now, quick. Okay. So this is a story by Dr. H.G. Mertens. And Dr. Mertens, he practiced in Washburn for about 8 years, and then he moved to Bayfield and practiced in Bayfield for about 20 years. And so he has kind of a fun story here. And it goes as, on Sunday, March 18th, I was called out to see an Indian woman living about 6 miles from Bayfield. As the roads were impassable, I hired a car and drove over the ice to as near to the place as we could, and then walked about 1.5 miles. I found the patient and thought that she was in labor. She gave a history of having a great deal of trouble during her confinements, and previous pregnancies, and I was not keen on accepting the responsibility of attending her so far away from help. Nothing happened, however, until Wednesday morning following, when I was again called to come in a hurry. After making an examination, I satisfied myself that it would be highly dangerous to confine her at her home and suggested that we go to the hospital in Washburn, 18 miles away. Of course, we had to drive across the ice the whole distance. She consented to that arrangement, and I had a farmer who was a white man with a couple of bales of hay and a daredevil sleigh, put blankets and fur robes, and then we transported her as far as the car. After getting her settled in the car, she was quite comfortable, and we started off in a straight line for Washburn. A light snow had fallen the night before, and as usual, the wind was blowing on the ice, and as soon as we got away from shore. However, nothing happened, and we sailed along 15 to 20 miles an hour until we came to a point halfway between Bayfield and Washburn, opposite the Sioux River. Then, without warning, our car ran into a bad bank, stalled, and nothing we could do to move it. Either way, we had no shovels, and we were 6 or 7 miles from the nearest telephone. About this time, the woman began having pains brought on largely by nervous excitement of being stalled out in the ice. Pains became quite severe and regular, and I prepared to act as to deliver in the middle of Lake Superior. I directed the chauffeur, telling him to break them off and bring them to the car. We drove these poles into the snowdrift, and on the leeward side of the car, used blankets and quilts for a windbreak, and placed the heavy fur robe on the snow. When done, I was ready to proceed with whatever should become necessary. The only thing lacking was a bowl of hot water. About this time, we noticed a speck on the ice ahead of us, which I thought was a fisherman with a horse, and thinking he might have shovels, directed the chauffeur to run ahead and see. However, it turned out to be a man with a new Ford car going to Bayfield. We hailed the car, and it came across 1/2 mile of snow, breaking a new trail, and the driver pulled up alongside our car. By this time, the patient had quieted down again somewhat. I loaded her into the car, myself and the chauffeur going with her, and started back toward Bayfield in order to catch the noon train going to Washburn. We arrived there just on time. The patient was put on the coach, made comfortable, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Or did I? When we got down to the Sioux River and got a view on the ice and saw the abandoned car about 3 miles out, the sight seemed to have a stimulating effect on the patient, and she immediately began to have pains. I hushed her the best I could and told her to hang on for another 15-20 minutes. But this seemed to make her worse rather than better, and before long she yelled at the top of her lungs, "It's coming! It's coming!" The brakeman rushed in and emptied the coach. I quickly threw off my coat, rolled up my sleeves, and put on gloves, and commandeered an old farmer woman and told her that she was hereby commissioned nurse. She happened to be a Slovak and could not understand a word I said. In fact, she could not even undo the woman's clothing for the purpose of an examination. When I finally got to the examination, I found that there was no occasion for immediate injury. Doctor actually met me at the station, and in a few minutes, I had the woman on the table, where she remained for an hour and a half before the infant was born. After the delivery, she did have a severe postpartum hemorrhage, which certainly would have finished her had she been at home, because it required the combined efforts of Dr. Axley and myself to check the hemorrhage. So there's the good story. And now, so this is the next character in her story, Dr. Axley. And this is, we have quite a bit about him, because he was a significant person in the healthcare system. And this is a letter that was done at the Historic Museum, and it was written by Art McLeod. And I'll just read just a couple paragraphs of this. The doctor made house calls. Weather was never a factor. In winter, horses and sleigh were employed. Later, they did use a Ford car with a Caterpillar drive and runners in the front. I don't know how this worked out, but I always recall seeing him driving the sleigh. At any rate, cold and snow were no excuse for visiting the sick. The doctor and his wife, Jessie, did buy the Haskell building after World War I and turned it into a clinic and a hospital. Dr. Axley was also an official doctor for DuPont. I don't know how we ever find time for living. My sister Catherine and I well remember the doctor's visits to our home. He would arrive in his sleigh, insulated in his heavy fur coat, pound on the door, throw his coat over the newel post in the hall, and proceed upstairs to the sick room. The coat had a strong odor of horses and Lysol. We would take turns smelling the coat. It seemed to indicate that the doctor was here and all was well. And this is something I didn't know. The Axleys developed Rocky Run along the lakeshore. These attractive cabins were built by folks who couldn't pay for their bills, but were willing to contribute their time. And this was Dr. Oiak's one house, and at this house, he actually sometimes kept people in the porches during the summertime. This was before we had a hospital. And this is the Haskell building. And during World War I, DuPont greatly expanded its operations, employing about 2,000 people. And they built the Haskell building to house some of their employees and provide a social hall. But then after the war, DuPont laid off all kinds of workers and just reduced their operations. And so the Axleys purchased the building and converted it to a private hospital in 1922. And apparently many of the rooms of this were kind of furnished by churches and civic groups. And even when they were doing additions on the hospital, apparently there was a lot of community involvement with this hospital. Dr. Axley and his wife Jessie operated this from 1922 to 1935. In 1935, Dr. Axley had a stroke, but then his wife Jessie continued to operate until 1969. And I think there's probably some people that have worked in that hospital here, and maybe they can share some things later on. And here's a picture of Dr. Axley and Evelyn McManus. And here's a picture of the operating room at that hospital. And there's Dr. Larson there. I know, but, and then there's the old waiting room. And here's a picture of Dr. Gusso and Dr. Larson. And Dr. Larson, I had the opportunity to work with him, and Dr. Larson kind of sometimes got in trouble because he wasn't really good with medical records, but he really didn't need medical records because he had a lot of stuff up there. And I can remember one time seeing somebody, and I couldn't remember seeing him at all, and he says, "Oh yeah, you admitted her, 2 years ago with such and such a diagnosis." And another thing about Dr. Larson, I used to be the camp doctor for one of the Girl Scout camps down in Delta, and they'd call us up, and there was a nurse out there, and she'd call us up, and about various kids that were sick and stuff like that. And then one time, Dr. Larson, I wasn't around, so Dr. Larson took the call, and they said, "Well, we got this little girl, and she's got a fever, and she's got this funny rash on her, and blah, blah, blah." And this was long before any of us knew anything about Lyme's disease. And Dr. Larson said, "Oh, that's Lyme's disease. I've been reading about that, in some journal." And he was right, of course. And some more hospital pictures. There's a Dr. Telford and Olga Task. And then, the next one is Dr. Telford. And I think Sandy Olson is going to share some and Sandy worked for Dr. Telford for a pile of years and has some good stories. Dr. Telford was one of these, he had some funny quirks, but he was one of the most giving people you ever would meet.
I worked with them back in the 1980s, and I was privileged to call him my boss and my friend. If you knew him, you knew that he lived life to the fullest. No matter what he was doing, he went all out, whether it was downhill skiing or grooming trails, or exercising or eating healthy or tending to his flowers. So I think I'll just tell one little story about him that comes to mind. He was always at work. And so one day I came in and Dr. Telford wasn't there yet. I thought that was strange. But I thought, well, we had 3 examining rooms and I would fill them and I'll be ready when he comes in, which I did. No doctor. Well, a little worried because that was not like him at all. But then I entertained the patients in the 3 rooms as long as I could. And my worry was turning into aggravation, maybe even a little bit more than that. I had never called him. I'd never had to call him, but I thought, okay, what's with this? And so I went to the phone and dialed his number, and a man answered. And I said, could you tell me if Dr. Telford is there? And he said, yes, he's outside with the others. And I went, outside with the others? Who are you? And he said, I'm a fireman. His house is on fire. He did come in that day. He was just a little bit late.
Thank you, Sandy.
Oh, I was going to say one more thing.
Oh, sure, of course. It's hard to.
He's 92, and he and Libby live in a retirement community in Hayward, Wisconsin.
And I think I called him up and, asking about stories, and he kind of said, he was telling about the first day he came to Washburn was in January of 1961, and it was 27 below or something, and so he wasn't sure whether he was going to stay, but he did. Okay. So this, we had a nursing home in Washburn. This is the county nursing home, but we had a nursing home in Washburn for about 10 years before, a private nursing home down on 11th East Omaha Street, and it was run by an Alfred Zielsdorf, Mrs. Zielsdorf, but the county just decided they needed to build one, and so Bayfield County built this nursing home up by the courthouse up on East 6th Street. And it was in 1959. And fortunately, we have a couple people that worked in that nursing home. And I think Sandy Johnson and Sally Randall. Would you want to talk a little bit about? Sally was telling me some really interesting things. How much training you need to work there.
Yeah, I went to work there March of 1971. My sister-in-law worked there, and she said, if you want to work, just go down there, they'll put you to work. So I went down there, talked to them, I started work the next day. You didn't have to have all these licenses and certificates and everything, and you did everything at that point. It was a 32-bed nursing home. It is the annex building now of the courthouse. That's why people look familiar to it. I worked as a nurse's aide for many years, and then I also worked in the laundry department. I did that so I didn't have to work Sundays anymore. And I didn't have to work evenings and nights and all that. At that point, you did everything for the patients. Very seldom did anybody ever walk out of that place. And the old people at that time considered that was going to the poor farm. They went there to die. And the county helped the funding to build Northern Lights with the understanding that they would close their nursing home when Northern Lights opened up. So moving day, we moved 31 residents over to Northern Lights. We were laid off by the county. We went over there and got hired, brand new employees, had to start all over again with a 4-wing building instead of a 2-wing building. So you took twice as many steps because they got to choose their room in the new building. And so I worked, like I said, at the county for 9 years, and then I worked at Northern Lights for another 30+ years. And then I also worked at and I still currently work at the outpatient clinic in Washburn. So I'm just a few weeks short of 52 years in healthcare.
Senator Johnson, did you have something to add? We were going to have a wireless mic here, but our technology here isn't quite up to speed here, but it doesn't make any difference.
I really don't have a whole lot to say, but I had a couple cute stories that I remember from working there.
Right up to the mouth.
Now?
Yes.
Okay. One was about Dr. Telford. One day I came around to the nurse's station, and he was sitting there and he was charting. And he had his brown, stretchy, cross-country ski pants on and his jacket, which was brown also. And I said, Dr. Telford, I said, did you ski over this morning? And he lived then by the fish hatchery road. And he said, yes, I did. And I said, well, do you know today's the first day of hunting season? And he was like, oh no, and we got so excited. And then one of my favorite stories was about Dr. Christensen. One day we were again at the nurse's station, and the elevator opens, and he comes off the elevator with his little daughter, Donica, and he has her hand, he walks around the corner, walks down the hallway, and we thought, well, we wondered where he was going, and he was gone quite a while. And he came back, and he comes up to the nurse's station, and we said, what were you doing? He said, well, Donica's arm came off of her little rag doll, and she was just so upset that he took Donica and the rag doll down to surgery, where he sewed the arm back on. They were all pretty happy. And that's the kind of doctor he was. Good.
I'm not sure if I can remember that one. It's a good story. Okay. And so this is Bayville County Memorial Hospital, which was built in 1970. And, so before, everybody was down at the Haskell building, the old hospital. And so then, all of a sudden we have to move a whole hospital in a few days. You don't just get the staff, which are kind of overworked anyway. So the men's club, they moved everybody up, and Sandy Olson said that they were using some Olson's trucks here for it. I'm not sure if Dick can tell you which trucks they use, but anyway, so they moved all the equipment and all the patients and everything up from the old hospital to the new hospital. And then this is the new nursing home, which actually opened in 1980, and then I think we got a couple more pictures of that. Oh, Tiffany Grover and Sally Cummings are the kind of the activity people over there, and they had some stories, some really fun stories about some residents, but neither of them could make it tonight. But I think I do have, I grabbed one of Tiffany's stories and one of Sally's stories, and Sally was reading horoscopes to one of the residents, and the horoscope for this 103-year-old woman said had something to do with finding romance, and the response of the 103-year-old woman was, well, he'll have to be at least 105 or 106. This is a story Tiffany told me, and she was wearing shorts at one of the nursing home picnics, and I think they have picnics up at the nursing home, and she has some leg tattoos, and one of the women residents whose eyesight wasn't really great said to one of the other residents, "Those are the most unusual pants I've ever seen." She may have not said it quite so nicely. So here's John Blahnik, and I think it must be Olga Tast, and then Patty Hammer and Tom Cook and Carol Uptedal, who I think is here, and And then here in the 1980s, a couple more doctors came, myself and Dr. Vandenberg. And that kind of leads us into our next story. And Darlene Anderson is going to come up. And, I had talked to Rach, because I was involved in both of these. But hearing her story was just amazing. She's a great storyteller, and so is Darlene. So Darlene has Raylan's written down, and she's got her own in her head, so she can come on up.
Oh boy, I didn't know I had to be up front.
Well, we were going to have a wireless mic, but our technology is kind of a little on the lame side tonight. We were lucky we got the computer working.
Well, I'm going to tell Raylan's story first, of course, because then mine will be fast forward after hers. Hopefully I can do some justice here. All right, told by Raylan. I know it's no big deal these days, or in the olden days, to have a baby at home. But today, most babies' births are planned and have a midwife on hand and all the supplies, etc., ready for birth. It was Friday, February 22nd, 1982. I was overdue with my second child. The forecast was for a blizzard. Dave and I received numerous calls from my parents, Otto and Dorothy Roosh, voicing their concern on how on earth we were going to get to the hospital if this baby decided to come. I reassured them that Dave had it handled. Dave had been on the phone with friends about keeping our driveway plowed and drivable. We figured that would be enough since we lived just 4 blocks south of then Washburn Hospital. That evening we had a friend, Ron Smith, over along with his 1.5-year-old son, Matt. Matt and our oldest son, Tavis, were baby buddies and were having lots of fun. Ron was on hand to watch Tavis if we should have to go and leave for the birth. As the snow piled up, the plowing began. Dave used our blue truck to plow. Bill Olson brought the Olson building materials truck down and was plowing. His housemate, Phil Anish, was sidekick in the truck. Tim Cheney, a local cop at the time and friend, brought his Bronco and was plowing. I talked to my folks and we said, we're being plowed out and helped by many. The storm continued to roar. The evening eventually, after numerous stuck plow incidents, they called off the plow jobs. Friends departed with their trucks and Ron and his son stayed behind at our house. Exhausted, we all went to bed. At about 3:30 in the morning, I had some twinges, so I thought I might as well get up and do something useful. Our bedroom was upstairs, so I walked down to the main level and then proceeded to the basement. At that time, we heated only with wood, and the furnace was in the basement. I stocked the fire and headed back to bed. A little while later, about 4:30, I said to Dave, I think the baby's going to be born today, as I'm starting to have labor pains. We went into action. I said, I wanted to shower. Looking back, that was a crazy idea. But I distinctly remembering wanting to shower. Our upstairs bathroom wasn't finished, so I walked downstairs to the main floor. Whoosh! To the bottom of the stairs, my water broke. Now I really wanted a shower. Dave and I discussed our timeline had just shortened. Dave had the brilliant idea, or so he thought, of getting me on a snowmobile and driving me to the hospital. I said, no way. If we tip over, the baby will be born in a snowbank. Dave called the plow crew to return and see if they could free up the driveway once again. I proceeded to the bathroom and ended up with severe contractions and was now on the floor on all fours. No shower time for me. I told Dave I wasn't going to make it anywhere. Dave called the hospital, informing them that I was in labor and we couldn't make it to the hospital. Ron, his son Matt, and our son Tavis were all in the living room, Ron kindly trying to keep the two little ones occupied. As contractions progressed, I rolled over and laid on the bathroom rug. I told Dave the baby was going to come. He had Ron call the hospital and said the doctor was on his way. Thank God. I'm not sure how some of the rest of this went. I was busy having a baby. But this I know, Ron was on the landline in the kitchen. Dave was in the bathroom yelling to Ron so he could keep the hospital informed of the progression. I assume it was a nurse staying on the line. No cell phones, no cordless phones back then. The baby was ready. Thank God again that Dave witnessed our first son's birth. Dave checked to make sure the cord wasn't around the neck of the baby, and away I went, pushing the baby out. So now we have a messy little blob of baby. What do we do with the cord? No internet to search. We decided to wrap the baby in a towel and lay him on my chest. I would squeeze the cord tight until help arrived. Dave or Ron talked to the hospital and told them we had the baby. Dean Christensen arrived shortly thereafter. I'm sure he was exhausted from trucking through the snow. I was really glad to see his face. Don cut the cord and delivered the placenta, checked me and the babe over and went his merry way. Not sure if he got a ride home. The two young boys wandered over to the bathroom doorway and had a peek. Tavis, the now big brother, said, "Oh, baby." I went upstairs with the babe, Taylor Ray Pierce, and went to bed. The date was January 23rd, 1982. Time of arrival, 7:04 a.m. Shortly thereafter, the plow crew came in and Dave and Ron made them breakfast. I appeared on the balcony overlooking the kitchen and they all clapped. It's so wonderful to live in a small, wonderful town full of so many good, caring people. The next day, Sunday, I was called by the paper about the birth and gave them details. Lo and behold, the birth ordeal was the front page of the Daily Press on Monday with the caption, "Blizzard baby born during the snowstorm of the century." The article was picked up by the AP, and a while later, say about several weeks, I got a call from a college roommate, Lisa Cunningham. She said that she and her husband were stationed in Spain, and the birth had made it into the Stars and Stripes newsletter of the military. So that leads me to tell my story. Fast forward a year later, February 9th, 1983. Hectic delivery ends well. Headlines in the Daily Press. Babies arrive rather frequently, but not often, with the excitement which accompanied the arrival of Adam James Gusky at 1:18 p.m. I went to work that morning. Well, first of all, I got the kids off to school, went to work. I dropped my youngest off at the babysitter, and I told her, I said, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm gonna go in labor." She says, "Well, you better get out of here. I don't want a baby being born here." And I thought, oh, thanks. So I left, and I went to work. I was working at noon at the Washburn. I went to work just half days. So I went to work at noon, and I got to looking, and I thought, geez, I'm still having pains. What should I do? Well, I guess I better go home. But this is my 5th child that I was having, so I was a pro. I knew I had a couple hours, so I thought, well, I'll go home. call my husband who worked at Breadings at the time and say, I'm in labor, you better come home. So I was in labor, and it was fast. I said, okay, 12:10 I left work, and I'm waiting on the toilet for my husband, and he's come in the house, and he said, where are you? I said, I'm sitting on the toilet, and you better get me off or that baby's gonna be in there. So he got me off the toilet, got me in bed, and he said, now what do I do? Well, maybe get a bunch of towels and boil water, I don't know. But call the ambulance, doctor, somebody. So he did. We got the ambulance up the house, and they got stuck. Emerson Shields was the driver, he got stuck. The two EMTs that came in, Tammy Hoffman and I forget Kate Hagenbein, they were sitting by me on the bedside, and they were just as nervous as, and they made me nervous. And they told me, don't push, don't push. That's really easy for you guys to say. I said, are you really, is this bothering you? Yeah. I said, well, then maybe you should go out and help the rest of them, which my husband was outside, by the way, helping to get the ambulance out of the ditch. And then there I'm laying, and I thought, shush, I already told everybody to go outside, now what am I going to do? Thank God. Along came Dr. Christensen and Carol Uptedal, which I think is here, and I guess I'll have to give you a big hug. And Dr. Christensen said, are you ready? And I said, I sure am. And one push, and out he came, and it was awesome. Thank you. Yeah, you're so good.
So Carol, are you here somewhere? Come on up. Do you want to talk? Well, the nurse involved, Carol Optedal, is right in back by Sandy Olson, and I couldn't remember who he grabbed, but okay. Okay, and then this is Dr. Kreuser, who is still practicing up in Washburn, and Doris Malinowski. And then there's anybody else has some other stories, and I think Sandy Olson, you have one from Amy French.
One more. Amy French was Don's office nurse. And so I asked her if she would like to send a few memories of Bayfield County Memorial Hospital. So I'm reading Amy's letter. Here goes. I started as a nurse's aide at age 16. I had not a clue what I was doing, all about learning the basics from vitals and bedpans to passing sandwiches. Under the guidance of incredible nurses like Doris Malinowski, Jan Bergman, Kathy Jack, Barb Kirshner, LPN Sandy Olson, and Sandy Johnson, my 45-year nursing career launched. We were the full meal deal. ER, OB, PEDS, OR, all on 2 floors. You could go from helping in a challenging delivery of twins to wrapping a new stump. I was blessed to work with Harry Larson, John Telford, Don Christensen, and our PAs Lowell and Terry. A lot of skill and personalities. Some favorite memories. Violet Porter's amazing Sunday dinners. Kitchen raids during midnights until John Blahnik put a lock on the refrigerator. Ann Strum's constant straightening in the laundry room. Nightly coffee and smoke breaks with cops on duty, and she put in parentheses Gary Bratley. making sure Harry Larson's cigar ash didn't start fires in the trash cans. I returned as an LPN in 1977 to the hospital. No better nursing experience anywhere. After a 5-year stint upstairs, a new opportunity came up. My mentor and dear friend, Sandy Olson, had been working in the clinic with Dr. Telford. Better hours, no shift work. They had persuaded a young locum doctor from Casabel, Alaska, to join the practice. She convinced me time for a change, and I accepted the position. Those first few months were so slow, waiting for patients to accept a new, rather holistic doctor was a real challenge back then. But word spread fast. Not only did he have skilled hands and a calm bedside manner, he could deliver babies as natural as possibly. The OB practice took off. All of us hippies and tree huggers had our doctor. We had fun, but we're a real working family. I worked at the clinic until 1986 when Dr. Christensen delivered my now 36-year-old son, Austin. Didn't know I had so many papers. Then, of course, life changed. I moved to Seattle. I had never lived outside of Bayfield. I was again pregnant in a huge city with no family, no friends, no doctor, and no OB insurance. My only choice was to ask Don Christensen to help. I flew home 9 months pregnant with a 9-month-old. The stipulation back then was you could fly if you could get your seatbelt around you. And she said I barely could. With Sandy, Wendy Morado, Don, and Doctors Larson and Telford, it all happened with love and happiness. Would not have happened anywhere else, I'm sure. Casey had his 2-day well checkup at Dr. Telford's cabin. Don took a break from butchering turkeys to do a circumcision on day 3. We flew back to Seattle on day 4. I have gratitude every day for all the people at Washburn Hospital who helped shape my career, especially Don Christensen. I watched his daily commitment to exercise, rain, sun, snow, it did not matter, he was on a run. His non-judgmental approach to life with every single patient, his kindness, his acceptance and humility, his love of family and friends. He was frugal. At 65, I am still working as a full-time nurse at the University of Washington at Seattle, using all the skills I learned, oh, so many years ago. Peace and love, Amy French.
Okay. I know. Thank you, Sandy. If anybody else would have any stories they'd like to share, otherwise Mike Bailey has, this is the end of the program basically, and I want to just thank everybody that helped me with these stories and helping me, and I think when Jeannie Peterson first asked me, I think the next night, I thought, God, what am I doing this for? I don't know any of this stuff. But then you call up Sandy Olson and all kinds of other people, and it's like all kinds of stuff. Anyway, Mike Bailey has just one comment about the nursing home, and then thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Don. What a great event. I didn't plan to be here tonight. As a matter of fact, pardon?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I didn't plan to be here tonight. It just was happenstance. I was at Brownstone and I mentioned something and the gal says, well, you know what's happening tonight? Here I am. I'm the guy who's going to deliver the commercial. The commercial being that, for those who don't know, I'm on the board of Northern Lights Services, and I have been on the board for a number of years now. We're in the process of change. We're actively reaching out for a new administrator for the building. We do have one in place. However, she had some personal commitments, and so the board as a whole, however, feels that that's not what we want for our staff members and our residents. So we're going to actively recruit a new administrator. And the reason I'm here, of course, is to ask your help in all of that. We have put forth formal requests for candidates. However, informally, there's a bigger pool of candidates out there, and I'm hoping that you would have some suggestions for us and some recommendations for candidates that you may know of. At the present time, Northern Lights is a 50 residence facility, and as such, our pool of candidates can come from hospital administrators, they could be nursing home administrators, but they also could be others who have the background, training, skills, experience, but not necessarily formal certification. So if you are aware of a candidate that's out there that would be interested in applying, they can contact me or other board members. Peter Bremer is sitting in the audience over here. And of course, then we would refer their information on to our personnel committee and help them work through the process. I was amazed at the history that was talked about here, and of course Northern Lights has been a part of that for many years. And many know that the quality of service that Northern Lights has provided. We've gone through a transition period. We've done a strategic assessment as to where we are now, where we were in the past, and where we want to go in the future. And our hope is that the quality of service and the care that has been provided will not only be as good as it was in the past, but even better. And we're hoping to evolve into something that will further help our residents, the families of our residents, the friends of the residents, and the community at large. And when I think of the community at large, we're talking the region that Northern Lights serves. So if you can help us out, we would really appreciate that. We would like you to spread the word that we would like candidates for that nursing home administration position. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Don. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you all for coming, and thanks to the Event Center for hosting this thing, and to all the people that made this possible, and all my helpers. I couldn't have done this alone. And thank Lynn Adams, who kind of came in and we couldn't get my computer to work with the projector, you know, but Lynn's got all kinds of tricks.
Thank you. Yay!